Shadows in the fog. The first thread. The fog rolled in thick and heavy over the small coastal town of Black Hollow, clinging to the narrow streets and old brick buildings like a shroud. It was the kind of fog that made people uneasy, the kind that seemed to hide secrets. For Private Investigator Jack Mercer, it was just another night. But that would soon change. Jack was sitting in his dimly lit office, nursing a glass of whiskey, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was tense, urgent. It was Detective Laura Hayes from the Black Hollow Police Department. They had a body, and it wasn't pretty. The victim was a young woman, her life brutally cut short. She had been found in an alley, her throat slit, and a strange symbol carved into her forearm. It was the third such murder in as many weeks, and the police were no closer to finding the killer than they had been after the first. Jack had a reputation for solving cases that others couldn't, and Laura knew it. She needed his help, and despite his better judgment, Jack agreed. He had always been drawn to the darker side of life, and this case was no exception. The pattern emerges. The first victim had been a waitress, the second a college student, and now this latest victim, a librarian. On the surface, they seemed unrelated, but Jack sensed a pattern. He spent hours poring over the case files, looking for anything that might connect them. It was late when he found it. Each victim had been seen in the company of a man in a dark coat in the days leading up to their deaths. The descriptions were vague, but it was enough to go on. Jack took the information to Laura, and together they began to piece together a profile of the killer. He was methodical, careful, and he knew the town well. He chose his victims at random, but there was a ritualistic element to the murders that suggested a deeper motive. The symbol carved into the victim's arms was an ancient rune, one that symbolized power and control. The hunt begins. Jack and Laura divided the town into sectors, each taking a section to canvass for any sign of the man in the dark coat. It was tedious work, but it paid off. A shopkeeper remembered seeing a man matching the description near the library on the night of the last murder. With this new lead, they focused their efforts on the area around the library. It was there, in the shadow of the old building, that they found the next clue. A scrap of fabric, torn from a dark coat, caught on a rusted nail in the alley where the librarian had been killed. The fabric was sent to the lab, and while they waited for results, Jack and Laura continued their search. They interviewed friends and family of the victims, looking for any connection, any thread that might lead them to the killer. The trap is set. The lab results came back, and the fabric was a match to a coat sold at a local thrift store. The store's records showed that the coat had been purchased by a man named Thomas Grayson. A quick background check revealed that Grayson had a history of violent behavior and had served time for assault. Jack and Laura staked out Grayson's apartment, watching for any sign of movement. It was late when they saw him, slipping out into the night, his dark coat blending into the shadows. They followed him, careful to keep their distance. Grayson led them to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Inside, they found a makeshift altar, covered in candles and the same rune that had been carved into the victim's arms. It was clear that Grayson was preparing for another kill. The final confrontation. Jack and Laura moved in, their guns drawn. Grayson was caught off guard, but he was quick. He lunged at Jack, a knife in his hand. The two men struggled, the knife flashing in the dim light. Laura shouted for Grayson to drop the weapon, but he was beyond reason. With a final desperate effort, Jack disarmed Grayson, and pinned him to the ground. Laura cuffed him, and the two detectives stood over the man who had terrorized their town. The runes, the altar, the dark coat, it all made sense now. Grayson had been trying to gain power through the murders, to control life and death itself. As they led Grayson out of the warehouse, the fog began to lift, revealing the first light of dawn. The town of Black Hollow was safe once more. But Jack knew that the shadows would always be there, waiting. And when they returned, he would be ready. The aftermath. Grayson was sentenced to life in prison, his reign of terror finally over. Jack returned to his office, the case closed but not forgotten. He had seen the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men, and it had changed him. Laura stopped by his office one evening, a bottle of whiskey in hand. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of what they had been through hanging in the air. Finally, Laura spoke. "We make a good team, Jack." He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, we do." And as the fog rolled in once more, they drank to the shadows and to the light that would always chase them away.